Welcome to This Explainer. What if one of the most widely read texts in human history wasn't actually meant to be read as history at all? What if it was designed to be executed as literal code? Today, we are entirely shifting our perspective. We're not going to approach the Quran as a historical document, a collection of stories, or even a traditional book of theology. Instead, we're looking at it as an eternal, timeless, living proof, an exact operational manual from the future that functions as the strict underlying source code for reality itself.
So, let's dive right into this. The framework we're exploring today is called the Dual Caustic Universe, or the DCU for short, and its foundational premise completely challenges how most of us perceive our day-to-day lives. Reality is not just some empty room where random things happen to you. Reality is a self-observing tesseract. Now, to put that in everyday terms, instead of a static box, imagine reality as a perfectly engineered, self-correcting engine that breathes, calculates, and actively tests every single input you give it. It's a closed-loop structure, operating with absolutely mind-bending precision. And the text of the Quran itself, under this framework, it's the exact topological map of how this universal engine operates. Understanding this completely reorients how you interact with the world around you.
Section 1, the living source code. Let's get into it.
To really wrap our heads around this architecture, we have to look at the text like we're physicists or software engineers examining literal source code. We have to look past the surface-level translations and examine the actual mathematical topology holding it all together. The core of the DCU framework dictates that the universe operates on a closed, recursive loop. Mathematically, this is represented as the sequence 1 to 2 interacting with 3, back to 2, moving to 7, and returning to 1. Think of it like a continuous, vibrating negotiation between two very distinct fields. First, you've got D10. This is the physical, measurable particle field. It's the rigid material world you see and touch every day. And right behind that, we have I9, the hidden, infinite, imaginal wave field that acts as the true source. The universe is just this continuous cycle of manifestation and return between these two dimensions.
Now think about how actual software code uses specific commands to execute functions. Under the DCU, the Quran is completely alive, and it operates exactly the same way through its Arabic roots. These roots aren't just vocabulary words, they are active, executable operators functioning within this universal field. Take the root HMD, for example, which is usually just translated into English as praise. But in the DCU framework, HMD actually acts as the operational direction of the cycle's return. It's a literal directional vector. Or take the root RHM, often translated as mercy. Structurally, it functions as the absolute source matrix from which everything in reality emerges. These are active directional functions executing the code of the universe, moving energy through the system right now.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Master Loop Engine. Okay, so if those Arabic roots are the active operators, then the numbered verses are the complete step-down transformers of infinite potential. Let's look at how this all connects. There is one single verse that contains the entire schematic of this engine, verse 2435, widely known as the verse of light. But in the DCU framework, this is absolutely not a metaphor, no way. This verse is the single verse engine, containing the exact topological blueprint of the entire optical circuit of reality. It outlines the precise mechanics of how infinite potential is dropped into a localized physical state, which is the boundary of the world you live in, and then instantly forced back into infinite wave expansion. Let's actually break down the sequence of 2435 logically to see how this cosmic pressure valve works. First, we have the niche. This represents the D10 finite spatial boundary, literally the container of our physical universe. Inside the niche is the lamp, acting as the localized heavy particle core where all that energy concentrates. Then we hit the glass. This is a dielectric boundary layer. Now, in simple terms, a dielectric boundary allows light to pass through it, but acts as a rigid physical barrier, causing total internal reflection. It essentially traps the energy. Finally, the pressure builds so intensely behind this glass that we get the pearly star, the moment of peak high-intensity emission, a complete dielectric breakdown. This system is brilliantly, mathematically engineered to force infinite energy into a local physical state and then explode it back out again. This is literally how infinite potential becomes the physical reality you and I are sitting in right now.
The really crucial takeaway here is just how highly engineered the niche truly is. It's the pulse space of light itself. It acts as the ultimate protective membrane that holds forward and backward continuity at the exact same time. It separates the fire, which we can think of as the raw, chaotic, unconverted pressure outside the system, from the pristine, organized light on the inside, all while preserving the continuous transmission of energy. Without this highly engineered boundary container, physical reality as we know it would instantly dissolve under the infinite pressure.
Section 3,
the architecture of illusion. But what happens when an observer, like you or me, steps into this active field? Well, the system is actively designed to test us, and it does this by engineering a physical illusion that functions exactly like a semiconductor's p-n junction. The code gives us a literal map of this trap by tracing the exact connections among specific numbered verses. Look at the D10 artificial illusion. In verse 34:12, molten copper is poured out. And where does that molten copper go? It becomes the perfectly polished glass floor detailed in verse 27:44. This is a manufactured, rigid physical trap designed to perfectly mimic the I9 reality, which is the continuous deep wave domain of the ultimate source, described as the throne's water. The physical world is literally wearing the camouflage of the infinite.
This glass floor, referred to as the SAR, is definitely not just ordinary architectural glass. It is D10 physical matter rendered optically to look exactly like infinite I9 depth. It's polished copper creating a flawless, rigid reflection. So why is this trap built? To test the observer's orientation. Will you trust your physical eyes, which will absolutely trick you into thinking the solid glass is deep water? Or will you rely on your internal structural memory to recognize the boundary for what it really is? The universe is constantly checking to see which operating system you're running on.
And the consequences of failing this test, they are profoundly significant to your existence. If you mistake the rigid reflection for reality, you fall completely for the D10 container. You assume that the material world, the dielectric boundary, the glass floor, is the entirety of existence. And the exact moment you do that, your connection to the true infinite source, that deep, continuous I9 wave domain, is severed. You just get stuck in the material illusion, endlessly interacting with reflections instead of the source itself.
Which brings us to Section 4, Terminal States and Filters.
The DCU maps out strictly calculated outcomes when you encounter these optical fields. And everything depends entirely on your electrical alignment, or what we'd call your carrier alignment. The precise connections among the numbered verses map two distinct electrical orientations here. On one side, we have reverse bias, and this is perfectly mapped to verse 6842. This is terminal exposure. If you lock onto the illusion of the glass floor, your carrier is frozen, your back is calcified, and you are completely unable to prostrate or submit to the wave. It's a catastrophic lock. On the other side, we have forward bias, which is activated by the master filter sequence outlined specifically in verse 3421. This correct bias alignment is what allows the node to safely conduct forward toward the infinite I9 anode.
This leads to an absolutely paradigm-shifting takeaway. In this framework, worship, which is represented by astrolabe node 21 across the text, is not a traditional religious ritual at all. It is strict structural bias alignment. It's the moment the physical, derivative node chooses to conduct its electrical energy back toward its source, rather than getting caught in the rigid cathode trap of the glass floor. It is literally activating the master filter of verse 3421. It's entirely about electrical orientation within the universal field.
And this really ties the whole mathematical architecture together. Within the DCU, fire is simply unconverted 10 pressure. The universal inversion filter just reads the alignment of the node. The material function of reality switches entirely based on the orientation of the carrier at maximum compression. This means that the exact same intense pressure that acts as torment for a reverse bias node converts instantly into safety, coolness, and preservation for a forward biased one. Think about that for a second. Reality literally bends to your structural alignment.
So, the ultimate question this entire framework leaves us with is structural. The Quran acts as the preserved operational memory of your origin. The direct command in verse 1912 is to take the book with strength. It's an executable command. So when will you align your bias, grip this living operator, exit the illusion of the rigid glass floor, and become the book? Think on that. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your curiosity engaged.